there, I'm Sarah, and I grew up Amish in Pennsylvania. I left the community a few years ago, and one of the biggest questions people ask me is what Amish marriage is really like once the wedding is over. A lot of people picture something simple, peaceful, and wholesome. But for me, marriage inside that world came with rules that felt crushing long before I ever became a wife. Today, I want to talk about the 7 Amish marriage rules that broke me. Some of these might sound normal at first, but when you live under them every day, they get inside your head in ways that are hard to explain. So let's get into it. The first rule was that you weren't really allowed to marry for love alone. In my community, marriage wasn't just about finding the person who made you feel safe or understood. It was about marrying the right kind of person, inside the church, inside the system, with everyone's approval. If a girl fell for someone outside the Amish, that relationship was basically over before it started. It didn't matter how kind he was or how deeply you cared about him. If he wasn't Amish and willing to join, there was no future. And even if he was Amish, there were still invisible checkpoints. Was his family respected? Was he obedient, hardworking, the type of man the ministers approved of? I realized pretty young that my heart was never going to be the thing making the final decision. The community would. And once you understand that, love stops feeling free. It starts feeling supervised. The second rule was that marriage had to be approved before it could even exist. People think of a proposal as something private and romantic, but that wasn't how it felt where I came from. Once a couple got serious, it wasn't enough for the two of them to decide they wanted a life together. The elders got involved. Permission mattered, reputation mattered, questions got asked. And if there had been any physical line crossed during courtship, that could lead to public confession before marriage was allowed to move forward. So instead of this exciting season where two people are building a future together, there was this pressure hanging over everything. You weren't just wondering whether you were ready for marriage. You were wondering whether your whole relationship could survive inspection. I watched girls act cheerful on the outside while privately panicking about what might come out and whether they were about to be humiliated in front of everyone they knew. That's not romance. That's fear dressed up as tradition. The third rule was that once you married, divorce wasn't really an option. I need people to understand how heavy that feels when you're raised with it from childhood. Most girls I knew didn't grow up thinking, if something goes wrong, I can leave. We grew up thinking, choose carefully, because once you step into this, you're in it for life. If your husband became cold, controlling, or emotionally distant, you were still expected to endure. If your marriage made you lonely, you prayed harder. If you were unhappy, the answer was usually to be more patient and more submissive. Marriage wasn't presented as a partnership you could grow inside of. It was presented as a vow you carried no matter what it cost you. That made marriage feel less like a promise and more like a locked door. Even before I ever walked through it, I was scared of being trapped on the other side. Rule number 4 was that the wedding itself was not about the couple. It was about the church, the families, and the community. Amish weddings where I grew up were huge, exhausting, and deeply public. The ceremony was long, the meals were huge, there were people everywhere, and after all of that, there was no romantic escape, no quiet moment, no chance to breathe and say, okay, now it's just us. You got married in front of everyone and then kept belonging to everyone. The bride's home became the center of the whole event. There were relatives, neighbors, dishes, benches, food, noise, expectations, and the next morning, instead of waking up into some private new chapter, you were helping clean. Sweeping, washing, serving, putting things away. Even on the day that's supposed to be the most personal day of your life, your own feelings come last. The 5th rule was that there was basically no privacy at the beginning of married life. In the communities around us, it was normal for a newly married couple to spend their first night and even the next few months at the bride's parents' home. Think about that. You're entering one of the biggest transitions of your life, and your family is right there. Thin walls, early mornings, constant work, no honeymoon, no safe little bubble where two people can figure each other out on their own. And that's what hurt me so much about it. Marriage was supposed to be this huge emotional and spiritual step, but there was almost no room for the emotional part. You were expected to go from daughter to wife overnight with everyone watching and then be up at dawn doing chores. It felt like there was no place for tenderness, no place for slowness, no place for two people to become a couple in private. The 6th rule was that a wife was expected to disappear into service. People on the outside sometimes admire Amish women because they see them as strong and family-centered. And yes, Amish women work incredibly hard, but what gets romanticized is how invisible that labor becomes. Once you're married, your role is crystal clear. You cook, you clean, you host, You help with gardens, canning, laundry, children, church meals, visiting, sewing, and whatever else needs doing. And you're supposed to do it quietly and well. Your value becomes tied to how useful, fertile, efficient, and uncomplaining you can be. That broke something in me because I realized I wasn't being prepared to become a whole person in marriage. I was being prepared to become necessary to everyone else and invisible to myself. The seventh rule, and honestly the one that stayed with me the longest, was that you were expected to perform contentment no matter what was happening inside you. You didn't complain about your marriage. You didn't talk openly about loneliness, resentment, fear, confusion, or disappointment. You smiled, you hosted, you worked, you went to church, and you kept going. If something hurt, you swallowed it. If you felt disconnected from your husband, that was private. If you were overwhelmed by children and responsibilities, that was your burden to carry. And that silence is what damaged me the most. Because once women are trained to hide what they feel, they lose the language to even ask for help. I saw marriages that looked fine from the outside and felt empty on the inside. I saw women praised for their faithfulness when really they were surviving. That taught me that in our world, appearances mattered more than honesty, and that is such a lonely way to live. Looking back now, I can see that these marriage rules weren't just about family or faith. They were about control, about keeping love inside approved boundaries, keeping women dutiful, keeping couples visible to the community at all times. And when you grow up under that, you start to believe that sacrificing yourself is the same thing as being good. Leaving forced me to unlearn that. It forced me to ask what marriage means when it's not built on fear, pressure, silence, and obligation. If you grew up in any strict religious environment, maybe some of this sounds familiar, even if the details were different. Maybe you also learned that love had conditions, that marriage came with roles you never chose, or that silence was holier than honesty. If so, I just want to say I understand. And if you're on the outside looking in, I hope this gave you a more honest picture of why Amish marriage isn't always the simple, beautiful thing people imagine it is. Thanks so much for listening to my story. If you want me to talk more about what Amish wives were expected to do after marriage, let me know in the comments. I'll see you next time.